Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we plunge into the heart of fascinating subjects, extracting the most important insights and surprising facts for you. Today, we're taking on one of history's most compelling narratives, the Maya civilization. For many, the Maya conjure images of towering, vine-covered pyramids shrouded in jungle, complex calendars predicting doomsday, and that persistent, almost romanticized idea of a great culture that simply vanished. It's a story that often ends with a mystery, a whisper of a lost civilization still buried under the jungle.
It's a powerful image, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really evocative. That notion of a once great civilization suddenly swallowed to the forest. But that popular narrative, while dramatic, well, it often misses the much larger, more incredible story. We're not here to unravel the mystery of a lost civilization because, frankly, they never truly vanished. Our deep dive today is into the incredibly resilient, adaptive, and transformative story of the Maya. It's a narrative far more extensive, complex, and ultimately far more compelling than any simple disappearance.
Absolutely. Our mission today is to unpack this entire rich narrative for you. From the civilization's deep roots and spectacular rise, through periods of profound crisis and the various theories explaining the collapse of its classic period heartland, all the way to its enduring persistence and vibrant present-day reality. We're going to show you that the Maya are anything but vanished. To do that, we've got a fantastic stack of material, especially the enduring story of Maya civilization, which gives us this millennia-spanning look at their adaptation, innovation, societal evolution, the works. It's going to give us the complete picture, not just a snippet of a collapse.
And that complete picture is crucial because it allows us to see how the Maya consistently navigated immense challenges. It reveals not just vulnerabilities, but also incredible strengths and, frankly, ingenious solutions. So, let's begin at the very beginning with the literal ground they built upon.
Let's do it. When we talk about the Maya, we're not talking about one uniform environment. Their world was, well, an incredibly diverse landscape, what's often called the Mesoamerican cradle. And here's a crucial insight from the outset. This geographical diversity wasn't just a backdrop. It was the engine that forced their innovation and interdependence. But that very interconnectedness, while powerful, also kind of sowed the seeds of their future vulnerabilities.
That's a great way to frame it. Imagine a vast territory, roughly 320,000 square kilometers. That's larger than the UK or Arizona. This expansive area stretches across modern-day Guatemala, Belize, western El Salvador, northwestern Honduras, and significant southeastern Mexican states like Yucatan, Campeche, Quintana Roo, Tabasco, and Chiapas. It's traditionally divided into three principal geographic zones, and each one had its own unique characteristics that really shaped distinct lifeways and, well, opportunities.
Okay, so what are these zones? Give us the lay of the land sort of south to north.
Okay, first, we have the Southern Maya Highlands. Picture an east-west band of volcanic mountains like the Sierra Madre, with some peaks soaring over 4,000 meters. This region enjoyed a cooler, wetter climate and, vitally, had rich volcanic soils perfect for robust agriculture. But beyond food, the highlands were an absolute treasure trove of indispensable resources for the entire Maya world. This was the primary source of hard volcanic stone, essential for grinding tools like manos and metates, which were crucial for processing maize. Then there's obsidian, that razor-sharp volcanic glass used for everything from, utilitarian blades to prestigious ceremonial items, and perhaps most importantly, jade, the most sacred and valuable material in the Maya worldview, found predominantly in these highlands.
Right, so the highlands were basically the resource hub, providing essential stuff for daily life and for elite status. What about the next zone, then?
Moving north, we enter the central and southern lowlands. This is the region most people immediately associate with the classic Maya heartland. Think the Piton Basin of northern Guatemala and parts of Mexico and Belize. It's characterized by dense tropical rainforest, low-lying plateaus, and rolling hills. Now, here's where the paradox really emerges. This area receives immense rainfall, sometimes up to 160 inches per year, which sounds like an abundance of water.
Yeah, it sounds like you'd never go thirsty.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the geology is the kicker. It's a porous limestone shelf, which means that despite all that rain, the water quickly drains away into subterranean channels, leaving very few permanent surface sources. So the Maya here had to rely heavily on seasonal swamps known as bajos, and they engineered incredibly sophisticated water management systems. Massive reservoirs, elaborate channels, extensive catchment basins, just to capture and store enough water to survive the pronounced annual dry season. It was a constant, ingenious battle against water scarcity, even in what seems like a really water-rich environment.
That's fascinating. So much rain, yet so little usable water on the surface. Incredible engineering. What about the third zone?
That would be the northern lowlands, specifically the Yucatan Peninsula. This region is much flatter and significantly drier, covered by more of a scrub forest than dense rainforest. Here, surface water is almost non-existent due to the karstic limestone bedrock. Survival in this zone depended entirely on access to natural sinkholes, those famous cenotes, which expose the subterranean water table. They are essentially natural wells, providing the only reliable access to water.
Okay, so you've got these three vastly different ecosystems, each with its own unique resources and challenges. How did this geographical patchwork shape the overall civilization?
Well, this geographical diversity was the fundamental engine of the Maya economic and political structure. It created an inescapable interdependence between regions right from the earliest periods. This fostered the development of extensive long-distance trade networks. The highlands supplied those prestige and utilitarian goods like jade and obsidian that the lowland elites needed to, well, legitimize their status and equip their societies. In return, the lowlands produced the agricultural surplus maize, beans, squash that fed the entire civilization.
So, a truly symbiotic relationship driving specialization and exchange across huge distances, but as you hinted earlier, this also laid the groundwork for critical vulnerability, didn't it?
It did. This early specialization and reliance on extensive trade, while spurring economic complexity and cultural exchange, also embedded a structural weakness into the Maya world. The intricate web of commerce that fueled its growth meant that a disruption in one part of the network, whether due to warfare, political instability, or maybe an environmental catastrophe, could trigger cascading failures in distant, dependent regions. This inherent structural weakness will become a critical factor in the major transformations we see later in the 9th century. A subtle but profound vulnerability that perhaps wasn't obvious when it first developed.
That's a powerful point. It shows that even in the earliest stages, the seeds of future challenges were being sown. So how did the Maya go from, simple farming villages to these complex cities we envision? This wasn't an overnight phenomenon, was it?
Far from it. The history of Maya civilization is conventionally divided into several main periods, each building on the last. You have the Archaic, the Pre-Classic, the Classic, the Post-Classic, and then the Contact period. The Pre-Classic period, spanning from roughly 2000 BC to 250 AD, was really the foundational era when all the defining characteristics of Maya society truly took shape. So where did it all begin? Take us back. Okay, the Archaic period, roughly 8000 to 2000 BC, saw the initial emergence of agriculture and the very first settled villages. Simple beginnings. Then, during the early Pre-Classic, from about 2000 to 1000 BC, we see the establishment of the first permanent Maya settlements. Around 1800 BC, communities on the Pacific coast were already cultivating the staple Mesoamerican diet: maize, beans, squash, jelly peppers. We even have archaeological evidence from sites like Quello in Belize, carbon dated to as early as 2600 BC, which pushes back the timeline of Maya presence in the lowlands significantly. This period is characterized by sedentary farming and the introduction of pottery.
So they were literally putting down roots, establishing a stable agricultural base. When do we start to see the emergence of actual cities, the big settlements?
That's the Middle Pre-Classic, from about 1000 to 400 BC. This was a period of profound societal transformation. What started as small villages began to coalesce and grow into the first true cities. A great example is Nakbi in the Piton lowlands. It emerged by approximately 750 BC. Already featuring monumental masonry architecture, sculpted monuments, and ceremonial causeways. Pretty impressive stuff. By 500 BC, cities across the Maya region were boasting large temple structures, often decorated with these enormous stucco masks representing deities. This is vital to understand because it demonstrates that the core elements of classic Maya urbanism, monumental construction, public art, centralized ceremonialism, were established centuries before the Classic period even began. They weren't just suddenly building these incredible structures. It was a long, complex evolutionary process.
Right, it wasn't like flipping a switch. And what about the peak of this early development?
That brings us to the late Pre-Classic, from about 400 BC to 250 AD. This was an extraordinary cultural flourishing, particularly vibrant in the Piton Basin. The city of El Mirador, for instance, grew to a truly colossal scale, covering an estimated 16 square kilometers. It featured one of the largest pyramids ever built in the world by volume, the Danta Pyramid, just massive. Even Tikal, which would become iconic later, was already a significant city by 350 BC. This era also saw the consolidation of key cultural innovations. By 400 BC, early Maya rulers were erecting carved stone monuments known as stelae to commemorate their achievements. And a developed hieroglyphic script was in use in the P10 by the 3rd century BC, laying the foundation for the incredibly rich textual record of the classic period.
That sounds like a booming, thriving civilization, but then even this vibrant era faced a crisis long before the more famous collapse, is that right?
Indeed. This dynamic epoch, however, ended in a widespread crisis. In the 1st century AD, many of these great late pre-classic cities were abandoned, in what scholars term the pre-classic collapse. The exact cause of this earlier decline remains a bit of a puzzle, but it serves as a crucial historical precedent. It indicates that Maya civilization was not a story of linear, uninterrupted growth. It was subject to cycles of expansion and contraction long before the more famous events of the 9th century. This pattern suggests an underlying fragility in the socio-political or perhaps ecological systems of these early urban centers, a dynamic that would reappear with even more dramatic consequences later on.
So the idea of a collapse wasn't unique to the 9th century. There were earlier warning signs, earlier cycles of growth and retraction. That's crucial context. Let's move now into what many consider the true golden age, the classic period, the time of the grand pyramids, sophisticated knowledge, the stuff of legends, really.
The classic period, roughly 250 to 900 AD, truly represents the zenith of Maya civilization, especially in the southern lowlands. It was an era of, well, unparalleled intellectual, artistic, and architectural achievement, defined by a highly complex social and political order. This period is largely defined by the practice of raising dated monuments using the long count calendar, a tradition that began around 250 AD. This gives us a remarkably precise chronology for the era's events.
And what was at the very heart of this flourishing society? What held it all together?
The entire magnificent edifice of classic Maya society, its science, its art, its very social structure, rested upon a specific ideological foundation, the institution of divine kingship. The king was the Kul Ajah, the Holy Lord. He was the essential mediator between the human world and the cosmos, literally the central organizing principle of the society. This system fostered incredible cultural cohesion and power during times of stability. However, it also introduced a critical, systemic fragility. The legitimacy of the entire elite order was directly contingent on the king's perceived ability to deliver favorable outcomes like rain, good harvests through elaborate ritual performance. Any prolonged systemic crisis that couldn't be explained or rectified by the king's ritual actions, like, say, a major environmental catastrophe, would fundamentally dissolve the very social contract holding the civilization together.
That's a powerful point about the double-edged sword of divine kingship. When things are good, the king gets the credit. When things go bad,
He gets the blame. Exactly. And speaking of incredible achievements, let's talk about their intellectual cosmos. Their understanding of math, calendrics, astronomy. It was truly mind-boggling for their time.
Mind-boggling is right. Tell us about the math first.
It was really something. Their intellectual achievements were among the most sophisticated in the ancient world. At the core was a highly advanced system of mathematics. They developed a vigesimal, or base 20, place value number system that was incredibly elegant and powerful. It allowed them to work with sums reaching into the hundreds of millions. What's even more remarkable is that the Maya independently conceived of and utilized the concept of zero, a mathematical breakthrough that actually preceded its widespread use in many Old World cultures. Their numerical notation was incredibly efficient, using just 3 symbols: a simple dot for 1, a bar for 5, and a shell glyph for 0.
That's profound, inventing zero on their own. And how did this mathematical genius apply to the stars? Astronomy must have been huge for them.
It was inextricably linked. This mathematical prowess fueled their keen observations of the cosmos. The Maya were meticulous astronomers, and astonishingly, without any optical instruments, they charted the movements of the sun, moon, and planets with truly astounding accuracy. From purpose-built observatories, they calculated the length of the solar year to be 365.242 days.
Wow.
Think about that. That figure is remarkably close to the modern scientific measurement, 365.242198 days, and was actually more accurate than the Julian calendar being used in Europe at the time. They could predict solar and lunar eclipses and precisely track the 584-day synodic period of Venus, a planet of immense religious importance to them.
So they were like ancient celestial calculators, and all of this fed into their calendar systems, which are legendary for their complexity, right?
Precisely. This vast body of astronomical and mathematical knowledge was codified into one of history's most complex and accurate calendar systems. It wasn't just a single calendar, but a set of interlocking cycles. You had the Tzolk'in, a 260-day sacred calendar which combined 20-day names with 13 numbers. Then there was the Hab, a 365-day secular calendar composed of 18 months of 20 days each. plus a short 5-day period known as the Wayeb. That was considered a dangerous and unlucky time.
Okay, so two main calendars running at the same time. How did they mesh?
These two cycles ran concurrently, and they would align every 52 years to form what they call the calendar round. But to place events within an even grander absolute timeline, the Maya used the long count. This system counted forward from a mythical creation date, which scholars now correlate to either August 11th or 13th, 314 BC in our calendar. This allowed them to record dynastic histories, major events, even prophecies with incredible chronological precision. It put every event in their history on this grand universal timeline. It's a level of historical consciousness that's just humbling.
It really is. And they built these magnificent cities to reflect that precision and their worldview. Tell us about the architecture of power and piety, the cities themselves.
The classic period truly marked the apex of large-scale construction and urbanism in the Maya world. These weren't haphazard settlements. Maya cities were carefully planned ceremonial and administrative centers. They functioned as living cosmograms. What I mean by that is their very layouts reflected a deeply held worldview. Cardinal directions were key organizing principles, and major structures like pyramids and plazas were often precisely aligned with the movements of celestial bodies, the sun, during equinoxes and solstices, for example. This architectural alignment served as a constant public reinforcement of the cosmic order and the elite's crucial role in maintaining it.
So their cities were not just buildings, they were physical manifestations of their universe. How big did these places get?
At their height, the largest cities, like Tikal in Guatemala, Calakmul in Mexico, and Caracol in Belize, were sprawling metropolises. They supported populations estimated between 50,000 and maybe even 120,000 people. That's huge for the time. And these major centers were linked to extensive networks of smaller subsidiary sites. The heart of a typical classic city was the Grand Plaza, a vast, stucco-paved space surrounded by the most important civic and religious buildings.
And the iconic pyramids, what was their real purpose? Tombs like in Egypt.
Among the most iconic structures were the towering, steep-sided pyramids, which served primarily as foundations for temples dedicated to patron deities. While they sometimes contained the burials of important rulers, they were not primarily tombs in the Egyptian sense. Their main function was as stages for public ritual. Their immense stairways provided this dramatic vertical axis connecting the earthly realm of the plaza with the sacred celestial realm of the temple above. Complementing the pyramids were the palace's vast multi-room, often multi-story residential and administrative complexes for the king and the royal court. These were the centers of political life. Diplomacy, tribute reception, elaborate feasts.
And the ball courts. Everyone knows about the Maya ball game. Had to be important.
Indeed. Every major city also featured at least one ceremonial ball court where a ritual game with profound cosmological significance was played. What's truly remarkable about all these architectural feats, the pyramids, palaces, plazas, is that the Maya achieved them without metal tools, the wheel, or beasts of burden. They relied instead on immense manpower and incredibly ingenious engineering. It's an astonishing testament to their organizational skills and technological prowess within their constraints.
It really is. Makes you realize the sheer human effort involved. Now let's turn to the actual political landscape. Was it one giant empire or something more intricate?
The political landscape of the classic period, well, it's often been compared to Renaissance Italy or classical Greece. It was never a single unified empire under one central authority. Instead, it comprised a dynamic and often volatile system of independent city-states. We're talking about more than 40 distinct polities, or jawil, each centered on a capital city and controlling a surrounding territory of varying size. These city-states were constantly engaged in a shifting web of alliances, rivalries, and enmities.
So more like a collection of powerful individual kingdoms constantly jockeying for position. And at the top of each was the king, the Kuhul Ajah.
Exactly. At the apex of each polity was the hereditary ruler, the Kuhul Ajah, or Holy Lord.
This wasn't just a secular position. The king was a semi-divine figure, considered the principal intermediary between the mortal realm and the supernatural world of gods and ancestors. His duties were both political and religious. He was expected to be a successful war leader, leading his city's armies, capturing high-ranking enemies for public humiliation and sacrifice. He was also the chief priest, responsible for performing complex public rituals, including personal bloodletting, that were believed to maintain cosmic balance, ensure agricultural fertility, and guarantee the cyclical passage of time. The king's legitimacy, and by extension that of the entire ruling class, was therefore predicated on his demonstrated success in these critical roles.
That sounds like an immense amount of pressure. Seriously, and what about the rest of society? Was it very stratified? Oh yes, Maya society was indeed sharply hierarchical. Below the king was a powerful class of elite nobles, often members of the extended royal family. They served as high-ranking administrators, provincial governors, military commanders, priests. A middle class likely existed, comprising artisans, scribes, merchants, low-ranking officials, but the vast majority of the population consisted of commoners, farmers, laborers, servants, who supported the entire structure through their labor and agricultural tribute. And at the very bottom of the social ladder were slaves, often prisoners of war.
A clear social pyramid.
Yeah.
And this elite class was also responsible for the incredible artistic and literary output we associate with the classic Maya, right? The writing, the art.
Absolutely. The classic Maya were a truly literate society, possessing the only fully developed writing system of the pre-Columbian Americas. Their hieroglyphic script was a sophisticated logosyllabic system. It combined logograms, glyphs representing whole words, and syllabograms, which represented phonetic syllables. With a corpus of some 800 distinct glyphs, this system was flexible enough to record the nuances of their spoken language. Very complex.
What was the main purpose of this writing? Keeping records, telling stories.
Primarily, it was an essential tool of the elite. It was used to record dynastic histories, royal accessions, military victories, religious mythology, things the rulers wanted remembered. These texts were carved onto stone monuments like stelae, painted on beautiful ceramic vessels, and written in bark paper books called codices. It's a true tragedy of history, though, that Spanish religious zealots, particularly Bishop Landa, destroyed the vast majority of these codices in the 16th century. They burned what was an irreplaceable library of Maya knowledge. So, the monumental inscriptions, while invaluable, give us a somewhat biased record of its history, seen primarily from the perspective of its rulers.
That's a huge loss for our understanding, just devastating. But what remains is still spectacular, particularly their art.
Their artistic expression during the classic period reached a level of extraordinary refinement. And this art, well, it was rarely created for purely aesthetic reasons. It was a powerful medium for political and religious communication. Stone sculpture was a primary form. You see it in the magnificent stelae portraying rulers in full ceremonial regalia, often standing triumphantly over humiliated captives. Finely carved stone lintels, spanning temple doorways and wall panels within palaces, depict complex mythological and historical scenes. Places like Yaxchilan and Palenque have stunning examples.
And the murals at Bonampak are incredible too. So vivid.
Yes, exactly. The facades of buildings were often adorned with intricate stucco sculptures, while the interiors of some temples were covered in vibrant murals, most famously at Bonampak. These provide this amazing, vivid window into the world of the Maya court ceremonies, battles, daily life. Maya artisans also produced some of the finest pottery in the ancient Americas, particularly polychrome vessels painted with complex scenes of mythology, ritual, and courtly life. Just beautiful craftsmanship.
So we've painted this picture of a flourishing, highly sophisticated civilization at its absolute peak. But this leads us to the big question, the one everyone thinks they know the answer to: the collapse of the southern lowlands.
The classic Maya collapse. It's one of the most evocative and debated terms in archaeology. For over a century, it has conjured these images of a mysterious and sudden vanishing of great stone cities inexplicably swallowed by the jungle, a whole civilization just disappearing. But modern research has really replaced this romantic notion with a far more complex and, frankly, much more sobering reality.
You've really shattered that popular image of a sudden vanishing act. Can you help us picture what that protracted process of political disintegration actually looked like on the ground? Was it like a slow burn or more like waves of disruption?
It's vital to stress this. It was not a singular, instantaneous event. The term collapse is maybe even misleading. It was a protracted and regionally varied process of political disintegration and demographic decline that unfolded over roughly 150 years, primarily affecting the city-states of the southern lowlands. And crucially, this was not the end of the Maya people. It was a profound transformation that led to the end of a specific political and social order in one particular part of the Maya world. A reorientation, not an extinction.
That's a key distinction. So if it wasn't a simple vanishing act, what was it? I know there have been literally dozens of theories over the years.
Oh, more than 80 distinct theories have been proposed to explain this transformation. Everything from foreign invasion, epidemic disease, to peasant revolts, failure of trade routes, you name it. But here's where the powerful consensus has emerged in recent decades. The decline was the result of a catastrophic confluence of factors, what we might call a perfect storm. The key to understanding this period is to recognize that these factors weren't independent. They were locked in a series of mutually reinforcing feedback loops.
Okay, a chain reaction of unfortunate events. Can you walk us through the core argument? What kicked it off?
Absolutely. The primary catalyst, according to the current consensus based on a lot of scientific data, was a severe, unprecedented environmental crisis, specifically a multi-century mega drought. This overwhelmed the Maya's sophisticated agricultural and water management systems, leading to agricultural failure and, well, famine. This, in turn, triggered a political crisis, shattering the ideological foundation of divine kingship because the king's rituals couldn't bring rain. The resulting instability then fueled an escalation of endemic warfare, which further disrupted food production and trade. This cycle of interacting pressures ultimately led to the breakdown of state authority and the gradual abandonment of the southern cities as populations fled, looking for more stable conditions.
Let's dig into that primary catalyst first, the drought. For a long time, it was just one theory among many, but now you're saying there's formidable scientific evidence. What changed?
That's right. While it was once a speculative theory, the role of severe, prolonged drought is now supported by a really formidable body of independent scientific evidence. Multiple lines of inquiry from paleoclimatologists. They've meticulously reconstructed the climate of the terminal classic period, revealing an environmental crisis of a magnitude the Maya hadn't faced in millennia.
How do they even do that? How do you know what the climate was like 1,000 years ago? It sounds like science fiction.
It's pretty amazing science, actually. The foundational evidence comes from analyzing sediment cores drilled from the beds of lakes in the Yucatan Peninsula. For example, in a really seminal 1995 study of Lake Chicananab, researchers found this thick layer of concentrated gypsum in the sediment, dating precisely to the period of the collapse. Now, gypsum precipitates out of lake water only under intensely arid conditions when evaporation far exceeds precipitation. So this layer provided unambiguous physical proof of a major drought. It's literally a signature of drought etched into the earth itself.
That's incredible. The lake bed literally recorded the drought. Any other corroborating evidence?
Oh, yes. Further analysis of oxygen isotopes in the shells of tiny organisms like snails and ostracods from the same cores corroborated these findings. During droughts, the lighter water molecules evaporate more readily, leaving the lake water enriched in heavier oxygen isotopes. This unique chemical signature gets preserved in the shells of the organisms living in the lake. Confirms aridity. And this evidence has been reinforced and refined by numerous other studies. High-resolution rainfall records derived from analyzing stalagmites in caves, like Yopelum in Belize, give us almost a year-by-year picture of precipitation, confirming multiple, severe, decadal scale droughts during the Terminal Classic. And even marine sediment cores from the Cariaco Basin off the coast of Venezuela provide a regional perspective. Layers with lower concentrations of titanium, an element washed into the sea by rivers, serve as a proxy for periods of low regional rainfall, and they correlate precisely with the droughts identified in the Maya lowlands.
So, multiple independent scientific sources all pointing to the same powerful conclusion. What's the overall picture these records paint? Just how bad was it?
They consistently paint a picture of a megadrought that gripped the region between approximately 800 and 1000 AD. Some scientists describe it as the most severe climatic anomaly in the last 7,000 years for that region. It wasn't just one single continuous dry spell, but a series of intense, multi-year droughts occurring in phases, with particularly severe episodes centered around 810, 860, and 910 AD.
And how severe were these droughts? Can we quantify the rainfall reduction?
We can, remarkably. A groundbreaking 2018 study published in the journal Science provided the most precise quantification to date. By analyzing the isotopic composition of water molecules trapped within the crystal structure of that late Chichincanaab gypsum, researchers calculated that annual precipitation during the collapse period was reduced by an average of 41% to 54% compared to modern levels. During the driest peak periods, rainfall reduction may have been as high as 70%. That's huge, and it was accompanied by a 2% to 7% drop in relative humidity. For civilizations so utterly dependent on rain-fed agriculture, particularly maize, such a drastic and sustained reduction in water availability would have been utterly catastrophic. Widespread crop failure, famine, severe subsistence crisis.
That's an astonishing impact, just devastating. And you mentioned earlier that the decline primarily affected the southern lowlands. Did the drought hit different regions differently?
Yes, and this is crucial for understanding the geographic pattern of the transformation. Recent research, looking at plant wax lipids preserved in lake cores from both the northern and southern lowlands, revealed something interesting. It showed that the drying during the Terminal Classic was relatively more intense in the wetter, more populous southern heartland than in the already drier north. This hydroclimatic data aligns perfectly with the archaeological record, which shows an earlier and more persistent societal decline in the south. It powerfully explains why one region suffered much more profoundly than others.
Okay, so the megadrought was the primary catalyst, the big environmental shock, but you said it interacted with other pre-existing stressors, and one of those was warfare. The old myth was that the Maya were peaceful stargazers. Clearly not the case.
Far from it. That romanticized 19th century image of the Maya as a peaceful, stargazing theocracy has been definitively overturned by decades of archaeological and epigraphic research. Warfare was, in fact, endemic in the Maya world. It was a central component of elite political strategy and religious ideology. Classic period conflicts were often highly ritualized, focused on capturing rival kings and nobles for public humiliation and sacrifice, a practice that served to legitimize the victorious ruler's power.
So it wasn't necessarily about conquering vast territories, at least not initially, more about prestige and ritual.
Not primarily in the early Classic, no. But here's where the terminal Classic shift comes in.
Yeah.
As environmental pressures mounted and resources grew scarce, the very nature of Maya warfare appears to have escalated, both in scale and intensity. It seems to have shifted from these ritualized elite contests towards more destructive campaigns aimed at the actual elimination of rival states.
What's the archaeological evidence for this escalation? How can we see that shift?
It's pretty widespread across the southern lowlands. Cities began to construct defensive fortifications for the first time in their long histories. Hasty walls, moats, wooden palisades were erected around ceremonial centers, a clear sign of a new and pervasive threat environment. In some cases, like at Dos Palos, the desperation was palpable. Builders actually dismantled existing temples and palaces just to get stone to construct defensive walls quickly. AD, following a hostile attack, provides a chilling snapshot of this violent era. The city was burned, and its elite inhabitants fled so quickly that they left valuable possessions behind. This gave archaeologists a rare, intact collection of classic Maya weaponry spears, atlatl darts, the works.
That's chillingly vivid. Was there any direct evidence of this total warfare as opposed to the more ritualized kind, like proof of deliberate destruction?
Yes. A landmark 2019 study, led by the U.S. Geological Survey, provided probably the most direct evidence to date for this more destructive form of warfare, which the authors termed total warfare. At the site of Vitsna in Guatemala, researchers found a thick layer of charcoal indicating a massive, deliberate fire had destroyed the city. And they were able to link this physical evidence to a specific hieroglyphic inscription at the rival city of Naranjo, which recorded the burning, or pului, of Vitsna in the year 697 AD. Following this event, human activity at Vitsna just plummeted, indicating the attack had broad societal impacts, effectively eliminating the city as a political entity.
So they literally burned the city down and wiped it off the map as a political power.
Pretty much. The significance of this finding is twofold. First, it clarifies the meaning of a common war-related glyph, linking it directly to the actual destruction of a city. Second, and perhaps more importantly, it demonstrates that these highly destructive tactics were employed well before the peak droughts of the Terminal Classic hit. This suggests that intense warfare wasn't merely a late-stage symptom of collapse, but a pre-existing stressor in the system. As the climate crisis worsened in the 8th and 9th centuries, this pre-existing pattern of intense conflict likely escalated into a devastating feedback loop. Increased warfare over dwindling resources for the land, water would have severely disrupted agricultural cycles, destroyed stored food, interrupted vital trade routes, and created refugees, thereby compounding the very subsistence crisis that was fueling the conflict in the first place.
So you have drought, then increased warfare feeding on itself, and now let's talk about the human-environment interaction. There's that persistent theory that the Maya caused their own downfall through ecocide, essentially destroying their environment. Is that still widely accepted?
Right, that's one of the most enduring theories for the case. Maya declined the idea of a self-inflicted ecological catastrophe, or ecocide. This model, famously championed in popular works like Jared Diamond's Collapse, argues that a rapidly growing population in the late Classic led to massive deforestation. Deforestation to clear land for agriculture and also to procure vast quantities of wood needed to fuel the fires that produced lime plaster for their monumental architecture. This widespread deforestation, the argument goes, led to catastrophic soil erosion, nutrient depletion, reducing agricultural yields, and maybe even inducing localized drying that exacerbated the effects of the regional drought.
That sounds plausible on the surface. So is it correct? Did they chop down all their trees and ruin their soil?
Well, while the Maya undoubtedly transformed their environment on a massive scale, the simple ecocide hypothesis is now highly contested. It appears to be an oversimplification. The most compelling evidence challenging this comes from the site of Copan, in Honduras. An early analysis of a sediment core from a nearby pond seemed to show a dramatic increase in non-arboreal pollen, Maya, non-tree pollen during the late Classic. This was initially interpreted as proof of widespread deforestation coinciding with the city's decline.
Okay, so that initially supported the ecocide theory.
It did seem to. However, a more recent study extracted a longer, more complete core from the exact same location and produced strikingly different results. The new, more detailed pollen profile revealed that the most intense periods of deforestation at Copan actually occurred much earlier, back in the pre-Classic and early Classic periods. During the late Classic, at the height of the city's population, forest cover appears to have increased and stabilized, with a notable rise in pine pollen specifically. This suggests that, far from recklessly destroying their environment, the late Classic Maya of Copan were likely practicing sophisticated forms of resource management, possibly including forest conservation, maybe even cultivating pine groves specifically for fuel.
Wow, that's a complete reversal of the initial interpretation. So they weren't necessarily destroying their environment, they were actively managing it. That changes things.
It's exactly. A more nuanced understanding of the Maya's relationship with their environment is definitely required. They weren't passive victims of their landscape, nor were they necessarily wanton destroyers of it. They were highly skilled agricultural engineers. They developed this complex suite of intensive farming techniques, terracing, raised fields, canals, cultivating seasonal swamps to support one of the highest population densities in the pre-industrial world. This highly managed artificial landscape was incredibly productive, but it was also optimized for a specific and relatively stable climatic regime. The very success of their system, which allowed for immense population growth, created a society that was acutely vulnerable when that system failed. When faced with an environmental shock of the magnitude of the terminal Classic megadrought, their finely tuned agricultural and water management infrastructure was pushed beyond its breaking point. It led to a systemic ecological collapse that was a product not really of ignorance, but of a catastrophic mismatch between their established practices and a radically altered climate.
That's a crucial distinction. It wasn't a failure of ingenuity necessarily, but an unprecedented environmental shock pushing their existing successful systems beyond their limits. And all of this leads to the internal decay of their political and economic systems. So we've painted this picture of a society under immense strain from a dying environment, escalating conflict. How did these external pressures translate into the internal unraveling of their powerful political and spiritual engine? The cracks are starting to show where it hurt the most, right?
Yeah.
Right at the top.
Indeed. The environmental crisis and escalating warfare were catalysts for a profound internal breakdown of the Classic Maya political and economic order. The ideological glue holding the society together, the divine authority of the Kul Ajah, began to dissolve. As we discussed, the king's legitimacy was inextricably tied to his role as a supernatural mediator who could ensure agricultural prosperity through ritual performance. As the droughts intensified and persisted for generations, and as the king's ceremonies repeatedly failed to bring the rains, well, the populace's faith in the divine power of their rulers would have inevitably eroded. This crisis of kingship represented a fundamental rupture of the social contract between the elite and the commoners.
So the people lost faith in their leaders, and the leaders lost their power base. How do archaeologists even begin to find evidence of something as intangible as a loss of faith in leadership? That seems tricky.
The archaeological record provides a stark, if indirect, proxy for this collapse of elite authority. The tradition of erecting dated stone monuments, stelae primarily, the main medium for royal propaganda, it falters and then ceases entirely. The number of new, dated monuments being constructed across the southern lowlands peaks around 750 AD. Then it declines precipitously, falling back to earlier levels by 800 AD and dropping to virtually zero by 900 AD. Similarly, large-scale architectural construction in the central Maya area effectively ends after about 830 AD. The cessation of elite cultural production, the big building projects and monuments, is a clear indicator of the disintegration of the political and economic power needed to commission such works.
That makes perfect sense. If you can't afford to build your propaganda, you're probably losing your grip. And you also mentioned an economic failure playing a part.
Yes. Compounding this internal political crisis was a fatal economic shift. The great southern lowland cities like Tikal and Calakmul had built their power and wealth on controlling crucial overland and riverine trade routes that crisscrossed the Piton region. These networks moved vital goods, from utilitarian items like obsidian to prestige goods like jade and exotic feathers that were the currency of elite interaction and diplomacy. Research that chemically fingerprints obsidian artifacts to trace them back to their geological sources has revealed a decisive shift in trade patterns during the Terminal Classic. As warfare and political instability made the inland routes increasingly dangerous and unreliable, commerce shifted. It moved towards safer and perhaps more efficient coastal sea routes that circumnavigated the Yucatan Peninsula.
So the main arteries of their economy basically got rerouted, bypassing the old centers.
Exactly. This economic realignment would have effectively choked off the primary source of wealth for those inland southern capitals. It crippled their ability to pay for armies, maintain infrastructure, and sustain the lavish lifestyles and ritual displays that legitimize their elite status. Now, while direct archaeological evidence for large-scale peasant revolts during this period remains elusive, the combination of factors is compelling. You have famine from the droughts, endemic violence from warfare, and a delegitimized ruling class. It creates a strong circumstantial case for widespread social turmoil. The ultimate result of this confluence of crises was the demographic collapse we see in the archaeological record. The mass abandonment of the southern cities was likely not a single event, but a gradual process over several generations. Commoners and other social groups basically voted with their feet, abandoning the failing political systems and migrating away from the centers of power in search of survival and better opportunities elsewhere.
So what we've been calling the collapse was really this complex, multifaceted transformation over a long period. But this is where the story gets even more interesting, because the Maya didn't just vanish into the jungle. This wasn't the end, right? This brings us to the post-classic era, what you've called the Northern Renaissance.
That's absolutely right. The narrative of the Maya's fate does not end with the depopulation of the southern lowlands. That's a critical misunderstanding. To characterize the period following the 9th century transformation as one of uniform decline is to completely ignore the vibrant and innovative societies that subsequently flourished in the northern Yucatan Peninsula. The post-classic period, from approximately 950 to 1539 AD, was not some degenerate epilogue to classic splendor, but a dynamic era of reorganization and, frankly, resurgence.
So it wasn't a collapse across the board, but more like a strategic shift. They learned from their past challenges and adapted, moved north.
Precisely. The rise of new northern capitals like Chichen Itza and later Mayapan was not a historical coincidence. It seems to have been a direct and logical adaptation to the specific systemic failures that had led to the decline of the southern city-states. The post-classic Maya of the north engineered a more resilient model of civilization. They seem to have consciously or unconsciously addressed the key vulnerabilities of the classic southern system. They shifted their reliance to more stable water sources, those notes we mentioned, instead of reservoirs dependent on rainfall. They built their economic power on a more robust foundation of coastal trade instead of vulnerable inland networks. And they developed more flexible political structures, things like alliances and confederacies, instead of relying solely on singular divine kingship. This wasn't merely rebuilding, it was a fundamental re-engineering of Maya society.
That's a fantastic insight, a deliberate pivot based on past experience. Tell us about these new capitals of the Yucatan. Chichen Itza is probably the most famous.
It is. As the southern cities waned, the center of Maya political and economic gravity shifted decisively northward to the Yucatan Peninsula. The first great northern power to emerge from this transition was Chichen Itza. While its origins extend back into the classic period, the city really rose to regional dominance around 900 AD. Its ascendancy correlates directly with the decline of the southern centers. At its height, from the 10th to the 12th centuries, Chichen Itza was a sprawling metropolis and a powerful commercial hub, with an estimated population of up to 50,000 people. Its economic power was built on its strategic control of the new circumpeninsular trade routes, facilitated by its port at Islas Cerritos on the northern coast. This allowed it to import valuable goods like gold and obsidian from distant regions like central Mexico and beyond.
And after Chichen Itza's dominance faded, Mayapan rose to take its place.
Yes. Chichen Itza's dominance eventually faded, with archaeological data suggesting a decline as a major regional center by around 1100 AD. The reasons are still debated. Following this, a new power, Mayapan, rose to prominence and became the undisputed capital of the Yucatan, flourishing from approximately 1220 to 1441 AD. Mayapan is often regarded as the last great centralized capital of Maya civilization before the Spanish arrival. It was a large, heavily fortified city that exerted political control over a wide swath of the northern peninsula. The success of both Chichen Itza and Mayapan demonstrates a clear pattern of societal reorganization and the capacity of the Maya to establish new, powerful centers of civilization after the crisis in the south. They adapted.
And this sounds like a completely different political structure than the independent city-states of the classic period south. More centralized, maybe, or just different?
It was definitely different. The political organization of the post-classic northern states marked a significant departure from the model of singular divine kingship that had characterized the classic South. While rulers certainly still held immense power, there's strong evidence for more collective or council-based forms of governance in some cases, like multipel. This might have been a deliberate adaptation designed to distribute power and prevent the kind of systemic failure that occurred when the authority of a single divine king collapsed. Historical sources, like the books of Chilam Balaam, written after the conquest, describe the formation of the League of Mayapan. This seems to have been a political confederation or alliance joining the major Yucatecan cities, Mayapan, Chichen Itza, Uxmal. Now, the exact nature and timeline of this league are debated by scholars, but its existence, even as a concept, points to a political system based more on negotiation and shared power among multiple ruling lineages, rather than the absolute authority of one monarch. This system, while still fraught with conflict, may have been a more flexible and resilient political structure overall.
Interesting. But even this new, perhaps more resilient model eventually met its end, right? The Spanish didn't find a unified Maya state when they arrived.
You're absolutely right. The eventual downfall of Mayapan around 1441 was not the result of environmental collapse this time, but of internal political strife. Politics again. According to historical accounts, a rebellion led by Ajusupan, the ruler of Uxmal, overthrew the powerful Kokam family who had dominated Mayapan. This event shattered the League, or whatever central authority existed, and led to the political fragmentation of the Yucatan into at least 16 rival independent provinces, or Cucabal. And that was precisely the politically divided landscape the Spanish conquistadors encountered upon their arrival in the early 16th century.
Fascinating. History repeating itself in some ways, with internal conflict leading to fragmentation. And the art and architecture of this new era also reflected this synthesis of styles, didn't it? You see different influences.
Absolutely. The art and architecture of the post-classic period really reflect the dynamic cultural landscape of the era. It showcases this distinctive synthesis of traditional Maya styles with new influences coming in from central Mexico, particularly from the Toltecs. This fusion created a unique and powerful new aesthetic. At Chichen Itza, this cultural blending is on full display. The site contains buildings in the purely Maya poop style, that distinctive architecture with intricate stone mosaic facades right alongside structures that show strong central Mexican influence.
Like the famous Kukulkan pyramid, the big one everyone recognizes.
Precisely. The iconic pyramid of Kukulkan, being the Maya name for the feathered serpent deity Quetzalcoatl, features radial staircases on all four sides, which is more of a central Mexican feature. You also see vast colonnaded halls, depictions of warriors in clearly Toltec attire, and the chacmul, that distinctive reclining sculptural form used for offerings. That's another hallmark of this central Mexican influence. The later capital of Mayapan consciously emulated the architectural grandeur of Chichen Itza, though maybe on a smaller and slightly less refined scale. They built their own version of the Kukulkan pyramid. A key feature of Mayapan's urban plan, though, was the massive defensive wall that encircled the city's core. That's a testament to the more overtly militaristic and unstable political environment of the late post-classic. Artistically, things became perhaps more abstract and stylized, with an increased use of vibrant color, geometric patterns, and new media like turquoise mosaics and even metalwork in gold and copper, which wasn't common in the classic Maya South. This artistic and architectural synthesis demonstrates that the post-classic Maya were not isolated or in decline. They were active participants in a wider Mesoamerican world, constantly adapting and innovating.
This all shows remarkable adaptability and persistence over centuries, millennia even. But then came the European arrival, which had devastating consequences across the Americas. What was the impact on the Maya? How did they fare?
Yeah, the ultimate fate of the Maya civilization can't be understood by looking only at its pre-Columbian history. The arrival of Europeans in the 16th century initiated a new and brutal chapter, marked by conquest, disease, colonial oppression. Yet even this cataclysm did not extinguish the Maya. The first recorded contact between Europeans and the Maya occurred in 1511, when a Spanish ship actually wrecked off the coast of the Yucatan. This initiated a period of conquest that proved to be one of the longest and most difficult in the Americas.
Longer than the Aztec or Inca conquests. Why was that? What made the Maya different?
Unlike the centralized Aztec and Inca empires, which fell relatively quickly after the capture of their capitals and emperors, the Maya were politically fragmented. As we just discussed, they were divided into numerous independent and often warring provinces or kingdoms in the post-classic. This lack of a central authority meant that the Spanish couldn't just decapitate the leadership and take over. They had to subdue the Maya kingdom by kingdom, province by province. It was a grueling piecemeal process that took over 170 years to complete.
Wow, 170 years. And the Spanish also had a devastating weapon that wasn't steel or gunpowder, correct? Disease.
That's tragically right. The Spanish conquistadors certainly possessed a significant technological advantage. Steel swords, crossbows, firearms, cavalry against Maya warriors, armed primarily with flint-tipped spears, bows and arrows, and padded cotton armor. However, the most devastating weapon in the Spanish arsenal was entirely unintentional. Old-world infectious diseases, waves of smallpox, measles, influenza swept through the Maya populations who had absolutely no prior exposure, no immunological resistance. The resulting epidemics were catastrophic, causing demographic collapse with mortality rates estimated to be as high as 75% to 90% in many regions. Just staggering losses.
That's almost unimaginable. An unimaginable scale of loss. So despite all that the warfare, the disease, the Maya still resisted for a very long time.
Despite the immense loss of life and the relentless Spanish military campaigns, Maya resistance was fierce and incredibly protracted. The Spanish established control over the northern Yucatan by around 1546, but Maya independence endured in the inaccessible forests of the Piton Basin in modern-day Guatemala for well over a century more. It was not until 1697, nearly 2 centuries after their first contact, that the Spanish finally conquered the last independent Maya state, the Itza Kingdom of Nochpatan, located on an island in Lake Pitnitza. The fall of Nochpatan marked the end of the last autonomous native polity in the Americas, a very late date comparatively.
1697. That's incredibly late. And even after that formal conquest, the myth of the vanished Maya is just that, a myth. They persisted through centuries of colonial rule.
Absolutely. The popular myth of the vanished Maya is precisely that, a myth, a misconception. The Maya people survived the conquest, and they endured the subsequent 300 years of Spanish colonial rule. This was a period defined by forced labor, the imposition of Catholicism, and systematic attempts to eradicate their culture and languages. One of the most infamous acts of cultural destruction in history, Bishop Diego de Landa, in 1562, orchestrated the burning of countless Maya codices and religious artifacts at Mani, Yucatan. He destroyed an irreplaceable library of Maya knowledge, history, and belief.
That's just horrifying to think about, all that knowledge lost. But despite that brutality, their culture somehow endured.
Despite this brutal oppression, Maya culture and identity persisted, often through syncretism, cleverly blending Maya beliefs and rituals with Catholic practices, sometimes hidden in plain sight. And resistance, both overt and covert, was a constant feature of the colonial and post-colonial periods. The most significant of these uprisings was the caste war of Yucatan, which erupted in 1847. It was rooted in centuries of oppression, brutal taxation, and the expropriation of communal lands for private haciendas growing cash crops. This massive Maya insurgency succeeded in driving the non-indigenous population out of most of the peninsula.
And they established their own independent state for a while, didn't they? The Speaking Cross.
Yes, remarkably. The rebels established an independent Maya state centered on the town of Santa Cruz in what is now Quintana Roo. It was governed by a unique messianic religious ideology based on a speaking cross that delivered divine pronouncements and guidance to the rebels. This autonomous Maya state resisted the Mexican government for over 50 years until it was finally suppressed by the Mexican army in 1901. The caste war stands as a powerful testament to the enduring Maya will for self-determination and resistance against overwhelming odds.
That's an incredible story of defiance and resilience lasting into the 20th century. And it brings us right up to the present day. The Maya are not just historical figures in textbooks, are they? They're still here.
Not at all. Today, the Maya are emphatically not a relic of the past. More than 7 million people who identify as Maya live in their ancestral homelands across Mexico and Central America, and also in diaspora communities around the world. They represent a vibrant and diverse collection of peoples, speaking more than 30 distinct Mayan languages. Think about that linguistic diversity alone. The legacy of colonialism, however, continues to shape the lives of modern Maya communities, who face ongoing struggles for their fundamental rights. Across the region, they are engaged in legal and political battles for land rights and the protection of their ancestral territories from deforestation, mining, oil extraction, and large-scale agricultural projects that often displace them.
And they still confront systemic challenges today, beyond land rights.
Indeed. They confront systemic racism, political marginalization, and socioeconomic inequalities that leave them disproportionately affected by poverty and lack of access to quality education and healthcare. In Guatemala, the situation was particularly tragic during the 36-year civil war from 1960 to 1996. The Maya people became victims of state-sponsored violence and genocide, with official estimates suggesting over 200,000 people, mostly Maya civilians, were killed or forcibly disappeared. A horrific chapter.
That's a terrible part of recent history. But amidst these immense struggles, there's also a powerful cultural renaissance happening, a resurgence of identity.
There absolutely is. Recognizing that language is the soul of a culture, Maya communities are at the forefront of efforts to preserve and revitalize their unique linguistic heritage. Community-led initiatives are establishing language immersion schools and cultural centers. Organizations working on things like the Mayan Languages Preservation and Digitization Project, creating digital resources, glossaries, keyboard layouts to ensure that Mayan languages thrive in the 21st century. Contemporary Maya artists, writers, poets, and weavers are adapting traditional knowledge and aesthetics to express modern realities and assert their identity on their own terms. Through grassroots activism, political organizing, and vibrant cultural expression, the modern Maya are actively shaping their own destiny, demanding their rights, and ensuring the continuity of one of the world's great enduring cultural traditions.
What an incredible journey we've taken today, from the very foundations of their civilization, through glory, crisis, transformation, and right up to their enduring presence today. It's crystal clear that the popular image of the Maya vanishing or being still buried under the jungle is just a profound mischaracterization.
It really is. The fate of the Maya civilization is a narrative of immense complexity. It defies simple explanations. It resists a singular definitive endpoint like collapse. This deep dive has traced their trajectory over, well, 4 millennia, revealing this pattern of cyclical adaptation to a series of profound challenges, both environmental and human-made.
We started with their resourceful foundations and the diverse geography of Mesoamerica, where regional interdependence fostered complex trade networks, a source of both strength and systemic vulnerability. We saw the rise of the first great cities in the pre-classic, the magnificent flowering of the classic period, that era of unparalleled intellectual and artistic achievement built upon the intricate but ultimately vulnerable system of divine kingship.
And we reinforce that the collapse of the southern lowlands wasn't some inexplicable mystery, but a logical, albeit catastrophic, outcome. It was driven by an extreme climatic event, that mega-drought interacting with pre-existing societal vulnerabilities like escalating warfare and political and economic fragilities. It truly was a perfect storm, not a singular vanishing act.
But crucially, this transformation was not an end. The post-classic period in the northern Yucatan witnessed a genuine renaissance, a deliberate re-engineering of Maya society that addressed the very failures of the southern system. And then they showed just extraordinary resilience through the trauma of Spanish conquest and centuries of colonial oppression right up to the present.
The Maya are not a lost civilization whose cities lie still buried under the jungle, as some forgotten past. That image is just wrong. Instead, they are a living, evolving narrative of persistence against truly overwhelming odds. Their story is an active, ongoing process of cultural survival, adaptation, and self-determination.
Their history is still being written by Maya people today, and it offers profound lessons for us all. It makes you wonder, what can we as modern learners facing our own complex global challenges take away from millennia of Maya adaptation, vulnerability, and that unbroken human spirit? Their history holds echoes for our own time, and it's a question that resonates far beyond the jungles of Mesoamerica.